Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so can't believe this is workshop 5. As I said, the topic this morning is native trees and rewilding. So rewilding is a very lofty term, actually. When I saw the topic myself, I was like, wow. But because traditional rewilding is about, bringing back wolves and bears and stuff into the landscapes, which has been quite controversial in different places. But rewilding basically just means restoring to its natural uncultivated state. I think it's natural. I think as humans, we always want to be in control of everything, and I suppose that's been to the detriment of nature in some of its forms. So rewilding, and there are lots of books on this and theories about it and controversy about it. So it's a form of environmental conservation and ecological restoration that has the potential to increase biodiversity and create self-sustaining environments, thereby mitigating climate change. So at the big level, it revitalizes wildlife. Actually, not just at the big level, at a small level, it does this too. It helps lock away carbon. It cleans our air and water through filtration, both through the leaves and the roots of plants and stuff. It connects people with nature, obviously. It helps to mitigate against flooding, which is becoming more and more important. I just letting somebody else in there. Welcome to anybody who's just joined. We've just started really on the topic of rewilding and native plants and trees, so you're very welcome. So it restores our, we have some more people coming in as well. I maybe started a little bit soon. Hello, welcome everybody who's just joined. We've only started really on the topic of rewilding and native trees, so I'll crack on. As before, we'll do half an hour and then break for 20 minutes. So so rewilding on the big level and even on the micro level, it provides loads and loads of services for us that we need as humans, really. And to simplify that, it just means to protect and create habitat, which means we'll restore ecosystems and encourage greater diversity of plant and animal life. So rewilding really is about all of us finding ways to work and live within healthy, flourishing ecosystems. And these, on a recent report, the state of nature, and specifically this section was about Northern Ireland. We have, this surprised me as well, we have one of the least forested regions in Europe, with only 4.3% of our land area covered by woodlands. And much of this is in plantation of non-native Sitka spruce, which I suppose people have been planting for timber. So eventually that's going to be felled anyway. And our biodiversity, like biodiversity everywhere, is declining. So 11% of nearly 2,500 species assessed are threatened with extinction from the island of Ireland, which is really quite frightening. Climate change, of course, is having an increasing impact on nature in the UK, with 40% of moss decline and 60% of aphid increase due to climate change, which leads to all sorts of challenges in terms of food production. And then swallows are arriving in the UK 15 days earlier, and breeding 11 days earlier than they did in the 1960s. And great tits laying their eggs on average 11 days earlier than they did in 1968. And so why does that matter, really? You think, days here and there, but it matters because when animals, birds and insects become out of sync with their food supply, and they can't adapt, then they can become extinct. You know, if they hatch out their birds earlier than there is a food supply, then the chicks are going to go hungry. So all of that is important, but there's lots of things we all can do, actually. So examples of rewilding. So there are huge examples at the macro level. It's about bringing back missing species such as wild boar and beavers and wolves and red squirrels and eagles and stuff. And there's much debate in terms of pros and cons for this. I know there are huge big areas of Scotland where there are advocates for, you know, private landowners who are wanting to reintroduce wild boar and wolves and sort of bigger predators like that, even the wildcat, and obviously local people are getting worried about that. So but you know, it's about reducing high populations of grazing animals in extensive grasslands, not fishing or water so much, and creating proper marine protection areas along our seashores, restoring marine ecosystems, which with things like kelp forests and seagrass, which actually absorb loads and loads of carbon as well. Things like removing dams and reconnecting rivers with their natural floodplains, restoring their natural course, and setting aside large, like very large areas for nature. So that's at the macro level. But I think collectively, there are so many things that we can do as individuals, and creating a wildlife friendly garden and helping our native wildlife to move through that is a really good start. So making your garden a haven. So this comes back to, we all, as humans, our natural instinct is to want to control everything and make it look very neat and tidy, and that isn't the natural course of things for our native wildlife and insects and stuff. So you can make your garden a haven by allowing things to decay and rot down, which is going to go back into the soil. The worms will take that down. Stop digging, because the soil structure is full of, I think when we talked about the compost, so in 1 teaspoon of soil, there are more living organisms than there are people on this planet, which is pretty mind-blowing. So every time you dig, you're disturbing that ecosystem underneath the soil, and within that ecosystem there are things like mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria which are moving the nutrients about your plants. So stop digging, which would be easier on your back as well. Plant a tree, of course, and that's something we're going to cover in depth today. Embrace scrub and weeds. Okay, there is a limit, but if you can give over a section of your garden to things like nettles, which are really important habitat for butterflies and different caterpillars, that's really important. Let the grass grow. If there's one action I think that councils and people and gardeners could do, it's just let some of your grass grow. Obviously build homes for birds and bees. And I love this quote from Sir David Attenborough. I think nobody kind of missed over the last couple of years that between Greta Thunberg and Sir David Attenborough, how he has highlighted the issues we have with pollution and plastic and what we're doing to the habitat, really. So, but you know what? It's gloomy, but it's not all doom and gloom. And there are lots of simple things that we can all do to make a really big difference to what bees and other insects have to forage on. And being mindful, just choosing the types of trees and shrubs and flowers that we grow in every season is a really, really good starting point. And so creating habitat for one group of animals, pollinating insects, for example, so that's like our bees and our butterflies and our moths, will in itself create ideal habitat for other creatures. So, for example, leaving unmown grassy or meadow areas for bees and other insects will improve the soil biology of that area and encourage worms. And then that's going to attract the birds and small mammals which feed on the worms and the insects, and amphibians as well. And that in turn will attract larger predatory birds and mammals. So you can see there from like the ecological pyramid, that, you know, what happens at soil level and then plant level has an amazing impact on everything that happens above that. So it's all connected. And so by default, improving conditions for one species will result in improvements up and down that pyramid. And many of our native creatures are also predators of garden pests. So for instance, there's a lovely photograph of a very dangerous looking ground beetle. But did you know that ground beetles eat slugs? So it's funny, sometimes when I'm out in school, kids seem to embrace the whole worm thing, which is brilliant. But, you know, if they see a millipede or a centipede or something, they're like, oh, what's that? You know, it's a wee bit scary and it's moving a wee bit fast. But actually, when you think about it, if you see an insect that's moving quickly, it's because it's a predator. That means it's a hunter. So it needs to be able to move quickly. And that means it's probably going to eat the things that are trying to eat your crops. So the things that move slowly, like slugs and snails and aphids and stuff, really are prey. So, so for instance, a family of blue tits can eat 100,000 aphids in a year, which is pretty phenomenal. And so natural pest control like that is an essential aspect of organic gardening. And it takes a wee while to build up a balance. But if you start like that, I think over time, it's like in the first year, you might, you know, there might be an imbalance, but over time, you're really going to see a big difference. And so I thought about, you know, we were talking about rewilding and the bigger picture, and I thought I would share some of the things that we have done in our garden over the last, I suppose, over the last 15 years. And one of the things which I think is, I know I said probably the single most important thing is to stop mowing, stop cutting grass, which really is. Probably the second, I would say, is to think about planting fruiting, flowering hedges or wildlife hedges. So about 10 or 12 years ago, we put in 2 big lines of fruiting, flowering hedges, and we purchased those wee whips. I mean, you're talking about 50p to a pound each. And they were supplied by the conservation volunteers through the Woodland Trust. And so varieties, so we did, I suppose, probably about 300 meters in total in a couple of different places. And those hedges include things like hawthorn and blackthorn and dog roses and birch cherries. There's also cherry plums, wild pears, a couple of elder trees, hazel, for the nuts, obviously willow, crabapple and blackberries. And over the years, we have seen those thrive. We also have a productive orchard, which is lots of different types of apples and pears and plums and soft fruit like josta berries and black currants and red currants and stuff. To be fair, the birds seem to get the red currants before we do, but and then I suppose leading on from that, the hedges around the fields that we have around the house, we don't cut those either. And there are lots of mature trees which are really important to bees and other wildlife. So I wish actually, I mean, I kind of took these photographs maybe 2 weeks ago, but at the minute, if you go outside, the dog roses are there. We've had the hawthorn, we've had the blackthorn, and obviously they're going to produce fruit. Things we can have ourselves, like sloes for sloe gin, for instance, but haws, and rose hips, which are really essential fruits for birds in the winter time. So as well as not mowing grass, I'd say absolutely put in, if you have along a fence line or whatever, if you could put in a native hedge or a fruit and flowering hedge, that's really, really, really going to help your wildlife. It's also a habitat for birds. I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes I drive around the country and every hedge seems to be perfectly square and cut down till about 4 foot high. And you just think it has no opportunity to flower. It's not really high enough for birds to nest in, which seems such a shame and such a lost opportunity to me. So moving on then to the next photograph. This is, I had to hunt through my Dropbox, but so this is out the front of my house, and on the left is a photograph from 2015. I'm kind of guessing by the car out the front and the fact that it was no tarmac, but so this was our front lawn, which is really uninteresting. Now we have lawn at the back as well. It's really uninteresting and it took forever to mow. It was also quite wet, a wee bit soggy as well. So, and this is it. This was it a couple of weeks ago. And so same angle from, these are herb beds that we have at home with mint and tarragon and chives and all the rest of it. But so, and I absolutely love it. And so we decided probably in the autumn winter time of 2019, I decided and then talked the husband into transforming that big area of lawn into somewhere for nature and for the bees and for us as well, because it wasn't like a place you could do anything in. Also, it's kind of it's quite north facing, so if you were attempting to sunbathe, you'd do it out the back of the house. But so I got a friend of mine who's a horticulturalist and knows the Latin name of everything, and she's brilliant, Eve, and we planted about 220 trees, and we keep adding to that actually, and put those in January, February 2020, of course, just before the whole COVID thing kicked off. And my brief to Eve was that I wanted mostly native trees, and I wanted stuff that was valuable for wildlife and for insects and for birds, and for us as well. So we planted out field maple, sessile oak, English oak, rowan trees, which have lovely flowers, and then the berries, obviously, crab apples, hornbeams, hawthorns to grow as trees as opposed to hedging. We have some lime trees which produce beautiful flowers for the bees and stuff later in the season. Beech and birch. We have some Scots pine, smaller things like dogwood and spindle and guelder rose, and holly trees. We put in some horse chestnuts as well. And of course, I suppose being the person that I am, I also took the opportunity to put in some nice edibles throughout that area as well. So we put in a couple of big walnut trees, which grow really slowly, cobnuts, some quinces and medlars, which are like old English types of fruit. And we also got 25 hazel trees, which are impregnated with truffle spores. So that's, like the French and Italian truffles that you would get, which smell really earthy, very distinctive, absolutely gorgeous flavour. So who knows, we might never ever get a truffle. And if they do grow, we might never ever be able to get a dog that's trained to find them. But anyway, we thought it was worth a go, and if nothing else, at least we have the hazel trees. So, and then I suppose as important as the trees was letting the grass grow in between. So we created the void areas, as you can see, some circular areas connected by paths, just about the width of 2 lawnmower runs. But in between, we've let that grass grow. and it's amazing. Even the paths get covered in white clover, and then we cut those very high until they go over, and they're just absolutely buzzing. If you can get down to ground level, they're buzzing with honeybees and solitary bees and wild bees. Absolutely brilliant. And then things appear. So as well as loads and loads of different grasses, which seem to be between that and the things that are appearing. So we have ragged robin, which is top right photograph, red clover, top left, buttercups, of course, which are everywhere. But we have things like oxeye daisy and red campion appearing, and loads of different types of grasses. And the place is full of butterflies. Like last year we noticed the meadow brown butterfly, which I think that's the thing. If you start creating areas for wildlife to come, it's so interesting to be able to see what does actually come. And so with the grasses, not really knowing much about how to manage that, we took advice and we just hired a machine for a day and cut all of that big grass down very late in the autumn time, and raked that all up. And actually, so we raked it all up and just sort of put it round about the trees and stuff, because we don't want the grass to die back and smother all the nice things that are underneath. So, but if you had a very small area, a strimmer or a pair of hand clippers would do that, absolutely. And this is a photograph I took the other day. This is my hubby on the right, and Eve, who helped me, and Reggie, the whippet, who loves it around there. He thinks he's doing an agility test going around the tree protectors, but actually we were trying to identify the different types of grasses and flowers and stuff, and even Eve, as an expert, couldn't get them. So we have an app called Picture This, which is brilliant, which tells you what absolutely everything is. So I think that kind of really shows you the value of just letting things go a wee bit wild. But you can do that and still have a beautiful place where you can be. So that, yes, another part of the garden. And actually this is kind of a good, just what we were talking about there, that, you know, letting everything go wild or not. So this, we're quite lucky to live in the country. And when we built our house about 15 years ago, we got the guys to build us a pond as well. And then I started keeping bees probably about 10 years ago. So we have this kind of love-hate relationship, which is more love now than hate. But and I think my hands-off approach seems to be working a lot better now. But so anyway, so the pond, obviously busy lives doing what you're doing, and so the pond was absolutely covered in brambles. And, you know, we had planted some gunner and stuff. You couldn't even see them. So the whole thing was covered in blackberries. And you couldn't get round the back of it because there was so much scrub and debris. And no doubt that was a great habitat for some things. But we decided with COVID and everybody's at home that we try and make it into a more user-friendly place. So we got a digger in, cleared out the brambles and the scrub and stuff, and made these paths around it, and then started thinking about the planting stuff for pollinators that were beautiful to look at as well. And so we've planted things, and we planted sowed lots of stuff from seed, like forget-me-nots and sweet woodruff. We planted valerian, which I grew from seed, catmint and pulmonaria or lungwort, things that are really good for pollinators. And of course the pond in itself is a brilliant place for habitat, and it was only when, obviously we didn't put the digger into the pond, we just cleared around the perimeter. But we discovered that we always knew we had loads of frogs, which are brilliant because they eat slugs, but we discovered we had newts as well, which is amazing. And actually we were doing a wee bit of tidying up the other day and found a newt, like a young newt out in the bank. So that's great. They're obviously breeding as well. And then Simon was a wee bit bored and we had like oak logs and stuff, built this wee log wall just as a place for wee things to live. And we've put in some nice things like roses, but again, like the wild roses that are open pollinated, so they're really good for bees and other insects. And I got some seed, some native woodland mix, which has got foxgloves and some bluebells and stuff in it, and planted it around the other side. So there's a good example of sort of taking back control a wee bit, but leaving room for nature to thrive as well. And then of course there's lots of things we grow that are edible that are also really good for insects, like borage, that top left, that wee blue flower. It tastes a bit like cucumber. It's a lovely thing to have in pims, or it's lovely in a green salad as well. The calendula, the orange one, the pot marigold, very different from the French marigold, which smells a bit, French marigold smells a bit weird, I think. So don't try to eat it. But the calendula, the pot marigold, like that, great for insects as well. And you can take those individual petals out, put it through salad leaves. You can use it to colour rice when you're cooking your rice, which is lovely. Nasturtiums, again, pollinators love nasturtiums, but the flowers and the leaves and the seeds are all edible as well. And then cornflower as well, again, really easy to grow from seed. And your wee cornflowers are, you can take off those blue petals, again, beautiful through a salad, and pollinators love them too. And then rosemary, when it flowers, is brilliant for pollinators. And chives, we grow a lot of chives, the chive flowers, which is that purple flower. Each one of those heads is made up of loads and loads of very small wee purple flowers that taste really, really oniony, absolutely gorgeous. So you can pull that head apart, mix that through your salad leaves too. And the same with garlic chives. So garlic chives will flower late in the season, and it's an amazing attractor of butterflies. So I would say about September time, with something that flowers really late, that's really, really useful. So trees specifically that are really good for nature of all kinds. So things like pussy willow. So that's, I know, it's a funny thing when you start keeping bees, actually you start to notice an awful lot more what's happening around you. So things like willow, which have pollen really early in the season, are a really important source of pollen for bees, honeybees, wild bees, all sorts of pollinators. Then apples, of course, including crab apples. The top fruits that you would eat yourself, like pears and plums. And then hawthorn, brilliant plant for pollinators. And then lime trees, of course, and horse chestnut, like those big candle spike flowers you get in horse chestnuts, are just a brilliant thing for pollinators. And actually a mature tree like that is every bit as use as a wildflower meadow, apparently. Also pollinating insects and bees, we use a thing called propolis to kind of stick things together, keep the cold out of wherever their wee homes are, which they get from the bark from trees as well. Alamankia, really, or Juneberry, really good. And things like buddleia, which would all be familiar with, brilliant for butterflies. Lilac, bird cherry, laburnum, and escallonia. And I suppose when you talk about woodlands, you know, even small plantings of trees are really good for pollinators. But and woodlands are an important part of our heritage. I know we said that in Northern Ireland, only 4.3% of our land is covered by woodlands. So, but birch, hazel, oak, and ash did cover a whole lot of Ireland. And native woodlands, obviously we have a moist climate here, of course we do, it rains all the time, and that favours broadleaf trees, and that's trees that lose their leaves in the winter and allow lots of light to reach the woodland floor, and therefore you get diversity in plants, such that you've got your wild sorrel, the bluebells, of course, native bluebell, which are gorgeous, and things like primrose. So the mixed ash woods were the predominant woodland type at Northern Ireland, and the main species being ash, oak, downy birch and hazel, and of course you've got rowan, sycamore and beech as well. And I suppose we can't talk about ash without talking about ash dieback, which is a disease brought into kind of UK and Ireland, and we think probably infected saplings maybe about 2012, and a lot of our native ash trees are dying, which is an awful shame, but some are showing signs of resistance, so all is not lost just at the minute. And I love this wee graphic actually, and with the because it is hard when you're out for a walk. I suppose everybody knows what an oak leaf looks like, probably a horse chestnut as well, and ivy, but it is quite difficult sometimes just to identify them. So so things to look out for, which are native to here, are obviously the lime, the willow, birch, oak, maple, pine, rowan, bird cherry and alder. I know round about here we have a lot of alder, just from, and ash as well, actually, just from the days when I suppose the place was formed, and things like holly as well, and blackthorn, obviously. And I love that, you know, we were talking earlier about putting in hedges. I love that you can put in things you can forage. So if you've got, you know, blackthorn is going to produce sloes, so that's great for sloe gin, or I suppose if you're not into alcohol, they're probably a sloe cordial. Rowans are really high in vitamin C, so the rowan berries can be made into jams and jellies and stuff. Blackberries, like you know, I remember picking blackberries not just as a kid, like we pick blackberries here all the time, but I think that's a lovely food memory for people to have. So by planting a hedge like that, not also are you helping the wildlife and feeding them, but you can be feeding yourself and your family as well, which is lovely. So just a few details about things like ash. And I suppose the point of putting these statistics together was how many invertebrates a tree like that can support. So ash can live for 200 to 300 years. They're good for nesting birds, whole nesting birds, and can support up to 68 species of invertebrates, and 200 species of lichen. So it shows you that a tree just isn't there absorbing carbon, producing oxygen for us to breathe, but it's supporting a whole wee host of other things. And the common alder, again, and it is very common, can support up to 141 invertebrate species, feed on alder, which is pretty amazing when you think that's just one tree. Birch trees can support up to 334 invertebrate species, have been recorded in birches. So there are two types, the silver birch and the downy birch. I can't actually, they don't look terribly different there in the photograph, do they? But I think the silver birch is probably the ones that we see in most people's gardens. But and in springtime, the flowers are the catkins, which stay in the tree and contain the mature seed by autumn time as well. So the great thing about birch is that it will grow in poor soils, but does like a sunny position. And downy birch is also tolerant of wet sites, which is great for our country. But silver birch needs good drainage. I suppose that's why you'd see silver birch in more gardens probably. So birch woods occur widely, especially in marginal soils and around lakes and dried out bogs. So, and then the hazel, of course, hazel producing nuts is a native species with many, many uses and a very long history in Ireland. So they're one of the foods associated with the very earliest human settlements in Ireland. Also used as a strong flexible timber, which was really good for housing and stuff. And hazel, of course, hazel poles. So hazel can be coppiced. So that is, you know, where you cut it back and it'll grow up again really quite fast. And the hazel poles are a brilliant thing to use in your garden for your peas or beans to climb up. So, and of course, hazels became native as seeds were carried by birds and animals. And I'm thinking about squirrels particularly during the time when Ireland was still connected to mainland Europe. So hazelnuts are eaten by woodpeckers, jays, and obviously our squirrels and the wood mouse and vole. But actually we planted quite a few hazels through our hedges and stuff, and we see the nuts forming and we think that's great, we're going to get some of those. Same with the cob nuts actually, but unfortunately the squirrels seem to always get them before us. But sure, everything has to live as well, don't they? So, and then the oak, majestic oak, which is native to Ireland and found in all soil types. It's very long lived and can live for hundreds of years and very valued for its timber. I suppose that's why a lot of the forests were cut down in the first place, was to make ships and boats and stuff back in the day. But it provides a brilliant habitat for wild animals, insects and birds. And mature oak will support over 280 different species of insects, which I think is phenomenal. So the traditional Irish oak is the sessile oak, which is the main species to be found in Ireland. And it's found commonly on poor and acid soils, often in hilly regions. So that's the oak. I know it's that's, what do they say, the best time to the best time to plant a tree was like 50 years ago. The second best time is today. So it's never too late to start that legacy. It's a bit like us with our truffles. You know, we might never get it, but somebody might. And then of course in our home gardens, shrubs and perennial plants are a big thing. So things like mahonia, which produce masses of flowers very early in the season, are really important for early pollinators. Lavender, who doesn't love lavender? The smell of that beside your front door as you walk through in a pot or something, grows really well in pots. I love lavender myself, especially English lavender, you know, with the small, sort of wee small heads. You've got abelia, the bee bush, and honeysuckle as well. Ivy seems unlikely, but ivy is the thing that flowers really late in the season. It's kind of the last hurrah for the honeybees. Now, ivy honey can crystallizes really quickly, so, and it's quite strong as well, and very, very good for you, I think. But ivy is, I know people think it's a curse at times, but actually it's really important source of food for bees, but also after that. So when the flowers turn into berries for the birds in the wintertime, and we would see, they hold the berries right into spring, and we would see the wild pigeons on the ivy a lot. Cotoneaster anybody's ever had cotoneaster and you walk past it, it's literally buzzing and humming with bee life. And then things, of course, that we can eat, like rosemary when it flowers, thyme, chives, even sage. All the herb flowers actually are brilliant for pollinators as well. And of course, the soft fruit bushes. So you've got raspberries, strawberries too, blueberries, black currants, red currants, white currants. All of those are a really good thing to grow for us and for nature as well. And then hedgerows. We did talk about this. So a great mix would be the hawthorn, blackthorn, and things like guelder rose, dog rose certainly, and the smell of those is gorgeous. So much nicer than, actually during the break I was thinking about, I think Jill, you were talking about old hedging that needs to come out, you know, and things like, you know, you see those castle wellens or leandii, or you know, those just green, and they've taken over and they're huge and they're keeping the light out and all the rest of it. And how much nicer would it be to replace those with a fruit and flowering hedge that has interest the whole year round? So things like willow and obviously crabapple, the wild cherry, elder flowers. Like we have elder, should pick some in the break. We have elder flowers at the minute out in the elders, and the smell of those when you walk past is just terrific. So you can use the flowers to make a cordial. I keep threatening to, but I've never got round to making you can make like an elderflower wine or elderflower champagne. So maybe that's the next topic. I don't know.
I used to make the elderflower syrup for coughs and colds and things.
Did you, Jill? Yeah, really good for you too.
Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to say, I made elderflower cordial with my mum last week for the first time. It's lovely.
Oh, did you? Oh,
Mary Berry's recipe.
Fantastic. I bet you felt really proud of yourself.
I did, because my mum had always made it for years, and it's like, no, I quite like it. It's so easy.
Yeah, so. It is. And that smell just goes through your whole house, doesn't it? It's just
yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. And then so you've got elderberries as well. If you don't take all the flowers and you leave some of the berries, elderberries are so packed full of vitamin C and polyphenols and micronutrients. Are really good for colds and boosting your immune system. And then you've got the blackberries, of course, and which are really good for us too, and the ivy we've discussed, and spindle. So, you know, we did talk about this before, that you know, small hedgerow plants like that, they aren't expensive, and most websites would have a wildlife mix or a fruiting mix, or, you know, if you go on to the Woodland Trust, even they have wee mixtures which sometimes they give away for free. So yeah, so hedges, yeah, the grass and the hedges, I think, are the really important things. And then flowers. So flowers throughout the season, I think, are brilliant. So you have something coming all the time, A, for you to look at, and B, for bees to have. And there's stuff we grow like daffodils, and I put in hundreds of daffodils last year too, because I like to look at them. You know, they're not that great for insects, but this year in the wintertime I'm going to put in a lot more crocuses and snowdrops, which really are good for insects. Small things like winter aconite, pulmonaria, which is also called lungwort, which have wee purple flowers on them, which bees just love. And then there's something called Phacelia, really easy to grow from seed. I actually bought some seed at the weekend for myself. Mallow, big blousy pink flowers, sedum, and then you've got monarda, very dramatic looking sort of red flowers on them. It's also called bee balm. Cosmos, those big flowery pink yellow centers, which are really good for insects too. Wallflowers, things like lesser celandine, which grows in the wild or underneath the hedges. Comfrey, we would grow comfrey to use as a fertilizer. And when it flowers, it's just, again, just humming with bees. Forget-me-nots. And I didn't actually realise that till I did sow some from seed, because they were my granny's favourite flower. And I hadn't realised how attractive they would be to the honeybees, but they were loving those. And then clover, red and white clover, which seems to pop up through our gardens and grasses, and excellent, brilliant thing for pollinators. Hellebores, which are great sort of winter and spring, bluebells, alliums, any of the allium family, you know, those big onion heads, Charenthe, which is a friend of mine gave me once, a brilliant thing for pollinators, and nasturtiums as well. So, and again, do you remember we discussed you can eat those, so that's like a win-win-win. And then so hanging baskets and planters. So I know everybody reaches for the bedding plants. So what I would say is, you know, some plants are bred to be showy and to be a wee bit bomb-proof and stuff, and councils use them flat out mad, and all their hanging baskets and stuff, but actually they're really no good for pollinators at all. They don't provide any food. So things like petunias and geraniums and begonias, busy lizzie, the double flowered, anything double flowered actually, because the insects can't get in to get the nectar of the pollen, but the double flowered French and African marigolds and Nemesia, I would avoid those if you can, because they're no good for pollinators at all. And there's so many other lovely things you could have, you know, things we discussed, like nasturtiums and calendula, cornflower, tagetes, which is like a marigold, but just much more useful. The cosmos, scabious, the wee pom-pom heads, absolutely gorgeous. Elysium, rudbeckia, and the Bidens and bacopa were two new things to me that I discovered on the All Ireland Pollinator Plan website. And then perennial things that are going to come year after year. You only have to plant them once, forget about them, they'll die back and they'll come again, or they'll just stop growing in the winter time and come back again. So things like lavender, echinops, echinacea, aquilegia, foxgloves, hellebores for early spring, erigeron, eryngium, astrantia, salvias, catmint, all was absolutely full of bees and other pollinating insects, and you couldn't kill it. You've got your white and red clover, crocuses again for early in the year, and muscari, again something that comes really early, and then of course the herbs. So I'm, you know, for me a lot of it is about growing for food, and that's how I started growing. But things like chives, the garlic chives, your rosemary, thyme, herb fennel puts up brilliant big like umbrella type flowers that are yellow, full of pollen and nectar. Things like anise hyssop and sweet cicely, lemon balm, absolutely loved by bees. I have to say we grow lemon verbena, which is much nicer for tea or in gin, or but lemon balm is well, you need to get your priorities right. So that's, yes, so things to avoid. And then I would say that if you can, there's like the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and they launched theirs 2020 to, or 2021 to 2025 guide there. They have a brilliant website that has guides for you know, sports clubs or community groups or private gardens or councils, or in any scenario actually they have really nice advice about what to do and what not to do, and you know, about not mowing and varieties to plant. So that's really worth checking out. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'd love now to have a have a chat and answer any of your questions.